Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're continuing with Advent of Code Day 2 Gift Shop. For part 1, we're given a list of ID ranges separated by commas. And our goal is to find all the invalid IDs and sum them up. An invalid ID is a number that contains a repeated sequence. For example, this would be an invalid ID because it contains a repeated sequence of 11885, as you guys can see right here. And that would be an invalid ID. Before we jump into the code, let's think about how to detect a sequence. First, guys, we could actually determine the amount of digits a number has. If a number has less than 2 digits, it cannot be a sequence because it would be a single digit. If it contains an odd number of digits, like this number right here, then it cannot be a sequence either because it cannot be split directly into two equal halves. If a number has an even number of digits, like this number right here, then there's a possibility that it could be a sequence. In that case, we can split the number into half, and we can compare the two halves, and if they are equal, then that means it would be a sequence. Like, for example, you can see this is an even number of digits. So if we split this into half and we compare the other half together, you'll realize that they are equal, which means it is a sequence, which makes it an invalid ID. Now that we understand the logic, let's jump straight into implementing the solution for part 1 in Python. Alright guys, let's start implementing the solution for part 1. So I'm just gonna do vim solution.py, and I'm gonna start by opening up the sample input that they give us for testing purposes. So I'm just gonna do with open example.txt as if, and let's create a variable. Let's call it id underscore ranges, which will be a list comprehension, and we'll simply place an id range in here. Let me go in full screen mode. So we'll say for id underscore range in f.read, and we'll say dot split by a comma. So if we look at our example.txt, guys, you can see that each id range is separated by a comma, as you guys can see right here. So let's test out our code to ensure that our ID ranges are being parsed properly. So if we do python 3 solution.py, you can see each ID range is split properly. Now let's remove all of these white spaces or new line characters at the end of each number. So we'll do id underscore range dot strip, and if we run our code now, you can see all those new lines got removed. Now we need to get rid of these hyphens so that we can get easier access to each one of our ID number ranges. So we can do dot split right here, and we can split by a hyphen. And if we rerun our code now, you can see that each one of our ID ranges split into a separate list. Now guys, we can determine the invalid ID, so IDs, and sum them up. So we can say for id underscore range in our id underscore ranges list, we can say if let's start by getting the start ID. So we'll say start underscore ID equals to int id underscore range, let's say at index position 0 for the start range number. So we'll say, then we'll have the end id now equals to int id underscore range at index 1 Then we'll say for I in the range of the start ID up to the end ID plus 1, we'll need to now determine if a number is a sequence, guys. So let's create a function. Let's call it is_sequence, and it will accept a number. And we'll simply get that number and we'll convert it into a string. And then let's get the number length. So we'll get the length of the number. And we'll check to see if the number length is less than 2, which means that it would be a single digit, so it would not be a sequence. So we'll simply just return false. No, if it is a even number of digits, if it is not a even number of digits, meaning it is odd, then we'll simply just return false. But if it is a even number of digits, that means there's a possibility that it is a sequence. So what we could do, we could get half of the number length. So we could say half equals to the number length divided by 2. So we do floor division right there to let it go into a integer type. And then we could say we could do return if the, so we could compare the two halves now, guys, now that we determine like the middle of the number. So we could say if return number starting at the beginning up to the half index is equal to the second half of the number. So we'll say half colon, and then we could say number length. We don't even have to put the number length there because we're just going to go to the end of the number string. And this should determine if a number is a sequence. So now we can simply call our isSequence function, and we can pass in I, which would be our number within our range, and then we'll need to get the total number of invalid IDs. So we'll say total invalid IDs, set it equal to 0, and we'll say total invalid underscore IDs plus equal to I. And then at the end we could actually do print the total number of invalid IDs are, and we could say comma total invalid underscore IDs, and we could actually print out each one of our invalid IDs. So we could say in like found invalid ID colon comma I, could add a comma right there. And now let's test out our solution, guys. So you can see it says found invalid ID 11, 22, 99. And if we look at our sample input on Advent of Code website, you can see that we're getting the same outputs. So that means our code is working. So you can see that for this example, the expected output should be this number. And you can see it matches the same thing. So that means our code is working. So now let's actually test it on our actual puzzle input and see if it works. So we can go up here and we can just say with open, and we can just put puzzle.txt, and it will try to calculate the total number of IDs. And this is what we got for our answer. Let's see if it matches our answer that we provided. And yes, guys, so that is how we solve part 1 of this challenge. Now let's jump straight into part 2. Alright guys, now for part 2 of this challenge. The rules changed a bit. An ID is now invalid if its entire number is just a sequence of digits repeated at least twice. So numbers like, for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, that is repeated 2 times at most, or 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, or 12, 12, 12, 12, 12, 12, repeated 5 times. That is the rule for part 2. So to check for invalid IDs in this case, the idea is we look at the number and try every possible sequence length that it could form. But we only try lengths that divide evenly into the total number of digits, because a repeating pattern must fit perfectly. So for each possible length within the number, we simply extract that slice or portion of the number and check if it rebuilds the original number. If it does, then that ID is a repeating sequence, which makes it an invalid ID. Now that we clearly understand the logic, let's jump straight into implementing the solution for part 2. Alright guys, let's implement the solution. So because part 2 is similar to part 1, I'm just gonna copy part 1's solution. So I'm just gonna copy it. And we're just gonna modify part 1's solution to solve part 2. So I'm just going to modify the is_sequence function. So I'm just gonna delete these things right here, the return underneath right here and everything. And we're just gonna keep the number variable and the number length variable checked. Because if the first thing we'll do is check if the number length is less than 2, that would mean that it is a single digit number, which means it cannot be a sequence. So now we can perform the new checks for part 2 rules. So the first thing we'll do is try substrings of all possible lengths. So we'll create a loop and we'll say for, I don't know, sub_length in the range of, and we'll start iterating from 1, and we'll say we'll take the number length and we'll divide it by 2, because we'll need to make the number length, we'll need to divide the number length evenly so that we can find a sequence, and we'll simply add +1 to that. And now we'll check to see if the number length does not divide evenly by the substring length. So we'll say if number_length modulus sub_length is not equal to 0, that means it does not divide evenly, then we'll just say continue, which means we will skip this iteration. Next, we'll extract a portion of slice of the number up to the substring length. So we'll create a variable, let's call it substring, and we'll set it equal to our number, and then we'll say starting from the beginning up to the sub_length, and then we will need to get the number of times that substring repeats. So we'll simply just divide the number length by the length of the substring. So we'll say repeats equals to the number_length, and we'll divide it by the sublength, and then we'll simply check to see, we'll multiply the substring by the number of times it divides evenly, and we'll check to see if it's equal to the actual number, and that means it would be a substring. So we'll say if substring times repeats equals to the number, then we could simply just return true. Then if we do not return true, that means at the end of the loop we can simply just return false, and this should work now. So let's test out our code. So I'll just do python 3 solution.py. And you can see it's brute force and everything, so it found invalid IDs. So let's wait on this to run, and let's see what we get. So it says the total number of invalid IDs, or this number, and let's see if it matches what we submitted for the puzzle input. Yes, and it is correct. So that is it for today's advent of code, guys. I hope you all learned something valuable. Don't forget to smash the like and subscribe button. Stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next video.